Welcome to True Crime Case Files. In today's episode, we take you to a community shattered by the death of a promising young cheerleader. What seemed like a tragic accident at first soon unravels into a tale of secrets, betrayal, and a shocking love affair that ended in murder and a secret pregnancy. Hannah Guilford was an 18-year-old high school senior from Kokomo, Indiana, whose life was a complex mix of triumph and turmoil. As a star cheerleader at Kokomo Community High School, Hannah was adored by her peers and admired for her dazzling performances during halftime routines. Her radiant personality and athletic prowess earned her the nickname Sparkle, and she frequently appeared in local newspapers highlighting her achievements in cheerleading competitions. Hannah dreamed of attending college to study kinesiology, with the goal of becoming a physical therapist for athletes. Hannah lived with her parents, Randy Guilford, 38, and Katrina Guilford, 34, in a cozy suburban home. Randy, a sales manager, had once been a talented football player before an injury derailed his career. He projected his unfulfilled aspirations onto Hannah, urging her to aim for perfection in her cheerleading and academics. Katrina, who had once been an energetic presence at Hannah's practices, had grown distant over the years. Her battle with alcoholism and feelings of inadequacy left her withdrawn, creating tension in the household. Beneath her bubbly exterior, Hannah harbored a secret that consumed her every waking moment. She had become romantically involved with her cheerleading coach, Eric Masterson, a charismatic and influential figure in the school's athletics program. Their relationship escalated into a forbidden affair, which became even more complicated when Hannah discovered she was pregnant with this child. Conflicted and terrified, Hannah confided in no one, not even her closest friends, fearing the scandal that would erupt if the truth came out. In the weeks leading up to her death, Hannah's life was a swirl of activity and mounting anxiety. She juggled preparing for final exams, cheerleading commitments, and the looming decisions about her future. Friends noticed she seemed unusually preoccupied, her usually radiant smile giving way to bouts of sadness. At home, arguments between her parents intensified, with her father's relentless pressure and her mother's drinking creating a volatile environment. Hannah's last days were a heartbreaking combination of hope and despair. She dreamed of breaking free from the secrets and pressures that dominated her life, imagining a future where she could embrace her passions and newfound responsibilities. Tragically, those dreams would be shattered by the devastating events that followed. On the morning of May 12, 2016, at around 7:30 a.m., Randy Guilford descended into the basement of his family's home in Kokomo, Indiana, expecting to see his daughter, Hannah, preparing for another day at school. Instead, Randy encountered a scene that would forever alter his life. Hannah's lifeless body lay at the bottom of the stairs, surrounded by cheerleading gear and ribbons, including trophies from competitions she had won. The basement, once a source of pride showcasing Hannah's accomplishments, was now the site of a devastating tragedy. Randy froze, unable to process what he was seeing. The 38-year-old sales manager, who had poured so much of his energy into encouraging Hannah's success, felt a wave of disbelief and panic wash over him. After a few agonizing moments, he rushed to her side, desperately searching for signs of life. But it was clear that she was gone. The vibrant daughter who had been the center of his world now lay motionless at his feet. Struggling to regain composure, Randy shakily dialed 911. "My daughter, she's not breathing," he stammered. His voice was choked with emotion as he tried to describe what he had found. The 911 operator asked for details, but Randy could barely focus, his thoughts consumed by the horrible reality that Hannah would never achieve the dream she had worked so hard for. Within minutes, paramedics arrived and confirmed Randy's worst fears. Hannah was dead. The once bustling basement was eerily silent, save for Randy's heavy breathing and the faint hum of a television left on upstairs. Meanwhile, Katrina Guilford, Hannah's mother, was still asleep in their bedroom. Groggy from a night of heavy drinking, Katrina was unaware of the tragedy unfolding just below her. It wasn't until Randy's anguished cries echoed through the house that she woke up, disoriented and confused. As the reality of what had happened sank in, her screams pierced the quiet morning, adding another layer of heartbreak to the devastating loss that now engulfed the Guilford family. The Kokomo police arrived at the Guilford residence around 8:00 a.m. on May 12, 2016. Responding to Randy Guilford's frantic 911 call, leading the investigation was Detective Brielle Mermaid Reno, a seasoned officer with over 5 years on the force. Known for her sharp instincts and no-nonsense demeanor, Reno was prepared for the challenges of a complex case. The sudden death of a popular high school cheerleader like Hannah Guilford was bound to send shockwaves through the community. When Reno and her team descended into the basement, the scene raised immediate red flags. Hannah's body lay at the foot of the stairs, surrounded by cheerleading gear, including her competition trophies and pom-poms. All the injuries on her body suggested a fall, the positioning of her limbs, and the lack of blood at the scene hinted at something far more sinister. The basement, dimly lit by morning light filtering through small windows, was adorned with framed photos and ribbons celebrating Hannah's cheerleading career. Despite the outward appearance of a tragic accident, Reno's trained eye caught subtle inconsistencies. The room was cluttered, but nothing seemed out of place or disrupted, unusual for a fall severe enough to result in death. Forensic technicians began combing the area, snapping photographs and collecting evidence. A large cheerleading trophy lying near Hannah's body drew particular attention. It bore faint smudges that could be fingerprints, and its weight made it a plausible murder weapon. Reno ordered it bagged and tagged for analysis. The investigation expanded to the rest of the house. In the living room, the TV was still playing Good Morning America, its cheerful tone incongruous with the tragedy. Katrina Guilford sat on the couch, her face pale and drawn. A half-empty bottle of vodka stood on the coffee table, a stark reminder of her long battle with alcohol. Randy paced nearby, visibly distraught but cooperative with the officers. Later that day, the coroner's preliminary report delivered a bombshell. Hannah was not only pregnant but also HIV positive. This discovery deepened the mystery surrounding her death. Investigators began probing her relationships, including her troubling and illicit affair with her cheerleading coach, Eric Masterson, a married man with significant influence in the school district. Detective Reno's instincts told her that Hannah's death was no accident. The combination of her pregnancy, her medical condition, and the eerie details of the scene pointed to a much darker story. As the investigation unfolded, the truths uncovered would send shockwaves through the tight-knit community. The first person Detective Brielle Mermaid Reno focused on was Coach Eric Masterson, the 46-year-old cheerleading coach at Kokomo Community High School, known for his commanding presence and ability to inspire his team. Masterson was a respected figure in the community. Beneath his polished reputation, however, Reno suspected there might be secrets he was desperate to keep hidden. At the station, Masterson sat in a dimly lit interrogation room, a sheen of sweat already forming on his brow. The stark walls and the faint hum of the air conditioning made the tension in the room feel almost tangible. Masterson initially appeared cooperative, speaking highly of Hannah Guilford, describing her as one of the most talented and driven young women he had ever coached. She had such potential, he said, his voice wavering slightly. The way she commanded attention on the mat, it was like she was born for it. Reno's questions soon turned more probing. She asked about Masterson's personal relationship with Hannah and whether it extended beyond the cheerleading practices. Masterson stiffened but denied any inappropriate contact, claiming their relationship was strictly professional. His unease, however, was unmistakable. The turning point came when Reno placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward Masterson. Inside were copies of explicit text messages and photographs exchanged between him and Hannah, messages sent just days before her death. Masterson's confident facade cracked as he stared at the evidence. His face drained of color, and his hands trembled as he clutched the edges of the table. She made me hotter than a dog in heat, he stammered. But I never meant for it to go this far. Reno pressed harder. We know Hannah was pregnant, Coach Masterson, she said, her voice calm but firm. The autopsy confirmed it, and the timeline points to you as the father. Masterson's jaw tightened and his breathing grew shallow. Before he could respond, Reno delivered another bombshell. She also tested positive for HIV. Tests have confirmed that she contracted it from you. The weight of the revelations crushed any composure Masterson had left. He buried his face in his hands, muttering, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know I was positive. When Reno pressed him on whether Hannah knew, he shook his head vehemently. No, she didn't. I never wanted to hurt her. Despite his admissions, Masterson continued to deny involvement in Hannah's death. He claimed he had no knowledge of her plans that morning and insisted their relationship, while inappropriate, had been consensual. His growing agitation, however, only deepened Reno's suspicion. When the interrogation ended, Masterson was released pending further investigation, but Reno made her position clear. "You're at the center of this now, Coach," she said, her gaze unflinching, "and I won't stop until I find out what happened to Hannah." Next, Detective Brielle Mermaid Reno turned her attention to Randolph Randy Guilford, Hannah's 38-year-old father. Randy worked as a sales manager at a local auto dealership and was a prominent figure in Kokomo. Known for his ambitious nature, Randy had a reputation for living vicariously through Hannah's achievements. A former high school athlete, his cheerleading career had been cut short by a back injury, leaving him with unfulfilled dreams he projected onto Hannah. He pushed her relentlessly to excel, ensuring she was the star of the team. On the morning of Hannah's death, Randy had been at work but rushed home the moment he received the call. By the time he arrived, police officers were already on the scene. Witnesses described Randy as visibly shaken yet oddly focused, repeatedly asking how the tragedy would affect Hannah's reputation and the family's standing in the community. His agitation overshadowed his grief, raising Reno's suspicions. During his interview with Reno, Randy presented himself as a grieving yet proud father, emphasizing the sacrifices he had made for Hannah's success. "She was the best," Randy said, his voice tight with emotion. "Hannah was going to go far, and I made sure she had every opportunity. She had the talent, the drive, everything." When Reno shifted the conversation toward Hannah's personal life, particularly her relationship with Coach Masterson, Randy's demeanor changed. He became defensive and evasive, insisting that his involvement in Hannah's cheerleading career was strictly supportive. Reno, however, had uncovered evidence to the contrary. Text messages retrieved from Randy's phone revealed an unsettling dynamic. Randy had been aware of Hannah's inappropriate relationship with Coach Masterson, and in some instances had actively facilitated it. In one message, Randy suggested meeting times for Hannah and Masterson, offering to cover for her at home. Another message from Randy congratulated Masterson after Hannah's stellar performance at a regional competition, with a disturbing insinuation that their relationship had positively influenced her routines. When confronted with this evidence, Randy's composure began to crack. He initially denied knowledge of the texts, but eventually admitted to being aware of their relationship. "I thought it was harmless," he muttered. "She was happy, and he cared about her success as much as I did." Reno noticed, however, that his voice wavered when he spoke, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his watch repeatedly, a total sign of nervousness. Reno also explored Randy's reaction to learning that Hannah had been pregnant with Masterson's child and that she was HIV positive, a fact the autopsy revealed. Randy's face darkened, and he clenched his fists tightly. "I didn't know," he said through gritted teeth. "If I had, I would have stopped it." Despite his claims of ignorance, Randy's behavior suggested otherwise. Reno suspected that Randy's deep concern for the family's image, coupled with his knowledge of Hannah's relationship with Masterson, might have driven him to act impulsively. As the interview concluded, it became clear to Reno that Randy was withholding critical information, and his role in the events surrounding Hannah's death remained under intense scrutiny. The final suspect on Detective Brielle Mermaid Reno's list was Katrina Guilford, Hannah's 34-year-old mother. Katrina had once been a vivacious woman, a former cheerleader herself, and a small-town beauty queen with a magnetic personality. By May 2016, however, Katrina had become a shadow of her former self, battling alcoholism and struggling with feelings of inadequacy. Her marriage to Randy had grown cold and distant, with Randy focusing all his energy on Hannah's cheerleading career. Katrina often felt invisible in her own home. Katrina's struggles with alcohol had become an open secret in the community. Neighbors frequently saw her at the local liquor store, purchasing bottles of inexpensive wine and vodka. Her drinking had escalated to the point where sobriety was rare, and her erratic behavior had alienated her from friends and family alike. Her relationship with Hannah was strained as well. Katrina resented the immense pressure Randy placed on Hannah to succeed, and was envious of the strong bond between her daughter and her husband. On the morning of Hannah's death, Katrina was at home. It was Katrina who discovered Hannah's body in the basement and called 911. Her voice on the call was frantic and slurred, and when officers arrived, they found her in a near-hysterical state, alternating between uncontrollable sobbing and screaming. Her unkempt appearance and the smell of alcohol on her breath immediately raised concerns. During her interview with Detective Reno, Katrina's behavior was erratic. She swung between emotional outbursts and moments of unsettling calm. When asked about her relationship with Hannah, Katrina's responses were inconsistent. "Hannah was my baby," she said over and over, but when pressed for details about their interactions in the days before her death, she stumbled through vague and disjointed answers. Reno shifted her questions to Katrina's relationship with Coach Masterson, and Katrina's demeanor shifted sharply. Her face twisted in anger, and she launched into a tirade, accusing her daughter of stealing Masterson's attention. "Hannah was always the perfect little girl," Katrina spat bitterly, "but she had no right to take what was mine. That man was supposed to love me." Her words revealed a simmering jealousy that bordered on obsession. As the interview continued, Katrina's agitation grew. When Reno gently suggested that Hannah's death might not have been an accident, Katrina exploded, shouting incoherently before collapsing into tears. Her volatility made it challenging for Reno to piece together a coherent narrative. But the detective noted a pattern of resentment and jealousy in Katrina's ramblings, both toward her daughter and others in her life. Katrina's unstable demeanor and emotional volatility marked her as a person of interest. Reno couldn't ignore the possibility that Katrina's deep-seated resentments, coupled with her deteriorating mental state, might have led to tragedy. As the interview ended, Reno walked away with more questions than answers. But one thing was certain: Katrina Guilford's troubled history and volatile emotions placed her at the center of this heartbreaking case. On May 18, 2016, just a week after Hannah Guilford's tragic death, a startling new development rocked the town of Kokomo. It happened during Hannah's memorial service, held in the high school gymnasium, where hundreds of mourners gathered to honor the cheerleader's life. The atmosphere was somber, with tearful tributes and heartfelt speeches, but it was Randy Guilford's unexpected outburst that left the crowd in stunned silence. Randy, clearly intoxicated and visibly shaken, stood abruptly in the middle of the service. His speech was slurred, but his words were unmistakable. He confessed to knowing that his wife, Katrina Guilford, had killed their daughter. In a moment of raw emotion, Randy admitted that he had helped Katrina stage the scene to look like an accident in a desperate bid to protect their family from public disgrace. Gasps filled the room as mourners struggled to process the shocking revelation. Detective Brielle "Mermaid" Reno, who had attended the service to discreetly observe the family's behavior, immediately realized the case had reached a critical turning point. Following Randy's confession, officers from the Kokomo Police Department quickly moved to detain him for further questioning. Investigators also returned to the Guilford home with fresh insights into what they might find. This time, when they searched the basement where Hannah's body had been discovered, they looked with new purpose. Using Randy's confession as a guide, officers found traces of blood that had been inadequately cleaned, along with additional shards of a shattered trophy that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. Forensic analysis re-examined the scene, confirming that the blood matched Hannah's DNA. The evidence, combined with Randy's detailed confession, revealed a harrowing account of the events leading to Hannah's death. Investigators determined that Katrina had struck Hannah with the trophy during a heated argument, and Randy, consumed by fear and loyalty, had aided Katrina in covering up the crime. The town of Kokomo was left in shock. What had initially been mourned as a heartbreaking accident was now understood to be a gruesome murder, concealed by the very people who were supposed to love and protect Hannah. With this new evidence, the investigation reached a pivotal moment, setting the stage for a dramatic arrest and a revelation that would haunt the community for years to come. Following Randy Guilford's shocking confession at his daughter Hannah's memorial service, the Kokomo Police Department wasted no time advancing the investigation. On May 20, 2016, just 38 hours after Randy's revelation, authorities officially identified Katrina Guilford as the prime suspect in Hannah's murder. Katrina, a 34-year-old homemaker battling severe alcoholism, had long been a troubled figure in the community. Her erratic behavior and strained relationship with Hannah were well known to neighbors and friends, but the truth of her involvement in her daughter's death was devastating to many. Detective Brielle "Mermaid" Reno led the effort to bring Katrina into custody. The arrest unfolded early that morning as the team assembled outside the Guilford home. Overcast skies loomed above, mirroring the somber tension among the officers. When Katrina answered the door, she appeared disheveled and visibly weary, As though the weight of her guilt had physically aged her in the days since the memorial, she offered little resistance and quietly submitted to the arrest. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Katrina broke into tears, not out of shock but resignation. She seemed to know the truth had finally caught up with her. As Katrina was escorted to the waiting police car, the usually bustling suburban neighborhood fell eerily silent. Only the faint hum of morning traffic in the distance broke the stillness. At the station, Katrina was formally charged with the murder of her daughter, Hannah Guilford. During her initial interrogation, Katrina was emotional but surprisingly cooperative. She provided a chilling account of the events leading up to the murder. According to Katrina, the tragedy began with a heated argument on the night of Hannah's death. Katrina, deeply intoxicated, confronted Hannah in a jealous rage over her daughter's rumored relationship with Coach Masterson. A relationship that Katrina had secretly coveted for herself. The argument escalated, and in a moment of blind fury, Katrina grabbed one of Hannah's cheerleading trophies and struck her, delivering a fatal blow. Panicked, Katrina called Randy, who returned home to find his daughter lifeless. Overcome by fear and desperation, Randy made the decision to help Katrina cover up the crime. Together, they staged the scene to look like a tragic accident. They moved Hannah's body to the bottom of the basement stairs, scattering cheerleading gear to make it appear as though she had fallen. Randy hoped this would protect their family from scandal, but his conscience ultimately forced him to reveal the truth. Katrina Guilford's arrest sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Kokomo. The Guilford family, once admired for their success and unity, now stood exposed as fractured and deeply troubled. The community grappled with feelings of anger, sorrow, and disbelief as they struggled to reconcile how a mother could commit such a horrific act against her own child. Katrina Guilford's trial for the murder of her daughter, Hannah Guilford, began in late August 2018 at the Jackson County Courthouse in Kokomo, Indiana. The case became a local sensation, with media outlets like the Southern Indian providing exhaustive coverage. The courtroom was filled with spectators, many of whom had known the Guilford family for years and sought closure for the tragedy that had shaken their community. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Mark Uno, a seasoned attorney known for his unwavering stance on violent crimes, argued that Katrina's actions were deliberate and premeditated. Uno presented Katrina as a woman consumed by jealousy and resentment over her daughter's close relationship with Coach Eric Masterson, a bond Katrina had desperately craved for herself. He emphasized the brutality of the act, describing how Katrina had struck Hannah with a cheerleading trophy and then enlisted her husband, Randy, to stage the crime scene to look like an accident. Forensic evidence and Randy's confession formed the backbone of the prosecution's case, leaving little room for doubt. On the defense side, attorney Lil Boonranch, a public defender known for her compassionate approach to challenging cases, argued that Katrina's actions were not premeditated. Instead, she framed them as the result of a momentary lapse in judgment, fueled by years of emotional distress, alcoholism, and an escalating argument with her daughter. Boonranch portrayed Katrina as a woman overwhelmed by her circumstances, a struggling mother who had reached her breaking point. She urged the jury to consider Katrina's history of mental health struggles and addiction, pleading for leniency and framing her client's actions as those of a deeply flawed but ultimately broken individual. Throughout the trial, Hannah's classmates, cheer teammates, and friends attended in support of the Guilford family, their grief evident. They listened intently as testimony painted conflicting pictures of Katrina, both as a loving mother who had lost her way, and as a jealous woman who allowed her emotions to spiral out of control. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. Katrina Guilford was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a bittersweet sense of closure to Hannah's friends and family, but the community remained divided. Some believed justice had been served and that Katrina's punishment was appropriate given the magnitude of her crime. Others argued that her actions, though horrific, were the result of her untreated struggles and that the sentence was unduly harsh. For Randy Guilford, the trial signified the final destruction of his family. His own complicity in the cover-up left him grappling with guilt and the heavy task of rebuilding his life after such a tragic and public downfall. In the aftermath of Katrina Guilford's trial, life in Kokomo, Indiana was irrevocably changed for everyone involved. Katrina, now serving a 25-year sentence at Logan Correctional Center, lived a life of isolation and regret. Once a familiar presence at her daughter Hannah's cheerleading competitions, Katrina now spent her days in the monotony of prison life. She grappled with the weight of her actions, her vibrant personality dulled by the consequences of her crime. Randy Guilford, Hannah's father, was left to face the wreckage of his family. He sold their home, unable to endure the memories of the house where his daughter had died. Moving to a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, Randy retreated from public life. The guilt of his complicity in covering up Hannah's murder consumed him, and his once respected status in the community was replaced by alienation. Struggling with worsening alcoholism, Randy became a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors or old friends, his days blending into an endless cycle of remorse and solitude. Coach Eric Masterson, whose controversial relationship with Hannah had been at the heart of the scandal, resigned from his position at Kokomo High School. While he faced no legal charges, the revelations about his inappropriate conduct irreparably damaged his reputation. Unable to find work in education, Masterson relocated out of state, hoping to rebuild his life in obscurity. However, his past followed him wherever he went, forcing him into low-profile jobs and a life lived in the shadows, far removed from the influence he once held. The community of Kokomo, previously united in admiration for the Guilford family and pride in its youth programs, was left fractured and disillusioned. Hannah's death and the subsequent trial revealed dark undercurrents within the town, breaking the illusion of a close-knit, idyllic community. While some residents sought to heal and move forward, others remained haunted by the tragedy, which stood as a grim reminder of the secrets and tensions that can unravel even the most cherished lives. As the years passed, Hannah Guilford's story lingered like a ghost over Kokomo. Her memory was preserved by friends and classmates who honored her with a memorial at the high school, but the pain of her loss and the scandal surrounding her death served as a cautionary tale of the devastating consequences of jealousy, rage, and betrayal. Thomas Delaney was a 40-year-old FBI agent with nearly 2 decades of experience under his belt. Known for his sharp intellect, careful attention to detail, and calm, calculating demeanor, he had become one of the most trusted agents within the Bureau. His reputation as a no-nonsense, reliable professional had served him well, and his career was on an upward trajectory. He had sacrificed personal time, friendships, and many of life's pleasures to climb the ranks of the FBI. To the outside world, Thomas seemed like an ideal family man. He had been married to his wife, Helen, for 15 years, and their relationship was often the envy of their social circles. They had a beautiful home and 2 children, and were often seen at charity events and family gatherings, looking like the perfect couple. Helen, too, was a well-educated woman, independent, and successful in her own right. However, behind the polished facade, Thomas had started to wrestle with an inner conflict that would soon spiral out of control. He had met Sarah Price, a bright, ambitious, and strikingly beautiful young woman, in the FBI office. Sarah had joined as an administrative assistant, but her work ethic and eagerness quickly caught the eye of her superiors, especially Thomas. Though their professional interactions initially seemed harmless, it didn't take long for the two to begin a secretive, passionate affair. Sarah was in her early 20s when she started working closely with Thomas. She was everything he wanted: youthful, attractive, and driven. Sarah had just moved to Washington, D.C., with dreams of carving out a career in public service. She admired Thomas not only for his accomplishments within the FBI, but for the aura of power and experience that surrounded him. Their affair began with stolen glances, casual conversations, and before long, a complete emotional and physical entanglement. For Thomas, the affair with Sarah became an escape from his increasingly strained marriage. His bond with Helen had begun to fray. The long hours at work, the late-night phone calls, and his growing sense of dissatisfaction with domestic life made the allure of the young secretary irresistible. As their secret relationship deepened, so did the risk, and yet they both pressed forward, intoxicated by the thrill of their illicit encounters. Helen Delaney, despite her own successes, had always placed her family first. She had supported Thomas's ambitions unconditionally, knowing the sacrifices he made for his career. They had started their life together as a team, and for a time, they were deeply in love. Helen and Thomas built a life that many would consider ideal. But the cracks began to show when Thomas's behavior started to change. At first, Helen dismissed her growing concerns as stress from his demanding job. But as the months wore on, she couldn't ignore the late nights, the secretive phone calls, and the strange behavior. It started with subtle things: Thomas becoming distant, growing impatient, and the increasing time he spent at work. Helen, a woman of sharp intellect, soon began to suspect that her husband was hiding something. She confronted him several times, only to be met with reassurances and half-hearted excuses. But her intuition told her something wasn't right. It was during one of their quieter moments together that Helen first became aware of Sarah Price. She had overheard a conversation between Thomas and another colleague, and the way he spoke of Sarah, a subtle tone of reverence mixed with admiration, set off alarm bells in her mind. Despite her suspicions, Helen remained in denial, unwilling to believe that the man she loved and trusted could betray her. But the signs grew more evident. Late one night, after Thomas had left for work, she went through his things, an act she would later regret, but which she felt was necessary for closure. That's when she found the texts. The messages were undeniable, flirtatious, intimate, and filled with promises of love and escape. She couldn't believe what she was reading, but the evidence was right there in front of her. The perfect life she had built with Thomas had crumbled. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a painful, undeniable truth. As for Sarah Price, who had moved to Washington, D.C. with high hopes of making a difference, she had worked hard to climb the ladder, and her role at the FBI was an exciting step toward achieving her dreams. When she was introduced to Thomas, she was in awe of his authority, experience, and accomplishments within the Bureau. But her respect for him quickly evolved into something more complicated. The initial interactions between Sarah and Thomas were professional, but as they spent more time together, their connection deepened. He would often confide in her about his frustrations with work, his marriage, and his longing for something more fulfilling. Sarah, eager to please, began to take on a more personal role in his life, often meeting him after hours to share meals or drinks. At first, Sarah believed that their relationship was just a harmless fling, an escape from the pressures of their respective lives. But over time, her feelings for Thomas became far more profound. She convinced herself that their connection was special, and that one day they could be together, free of secrets and lies. She had no idea how close they were to a breaking point. For Sarah, the affair was a whirlwind, but as she became more emotionally invested, the toll it took on her became more evident. She began to pressure Thomas for more time, more affection, more commitment. But Thomas, though he cared for her in his own way, was unwilling to risk everything for their relationship. His career his reputation, and his marriage to Helen were still more important to him. Despite his growing affection for Sarah, he continually brushed off her demands for something more. The affair between Thomas and Sarah had been going on for over 2 years by the time Helen discovered it. During that time, they had become experts at hiding their tracks. They exchanged cryptic messages, met in out-of-the-way places, and kept their relationship confined to stolen moments. They took every precaution to ensure that no one would uncover the truth. But the weight of the deception began to take a toll. As the affair continued, the secrecy weighed heavily on Sarah. She wanted more. She wanted to be more than just a secret lover. She pushed Thomas harder, demanding to know when their relationship could be more than just an affair. But Thomas, despite his growing affection for her, always kept her at arm's length. He was too cautious, too afraid of losing everything. Meanwhile, Helen, increasingly suspicious, began to track her husband's movements, watching as he became more distant and secretive. The moment Helen found the incriminating text on Thomas's phone marked the point of no return. She had confirmation, and now there was no turning back. What followed was a period of intense emotional turmoil for Helen. After the discovery of the affair set into motion, a chain of events that would culminate in a tragic and irreversible act of violence. It wasn't just the affair that drove her to murder. It was the depth of the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the realization that her life had been a lie. Her mind, clouded with anger and hurt, concocted a plan for revenge. On the night of the murder, Thomas was late returning home, as he often was after meeting Sarah. Helen, still in a state of disbelief, waited for him in their living room, quietly stewing in the venom of betrayal. When he walked through the door, he immediately sensed something was wrong. But before he could speak, Helen simply looked at him, her face an unreadable mask. She asked him about his relationship with his secretary. He tried to explain himself, to justify his actions, but it was too late for words. Helen wasn't listening. She wasn't ready to listen to his lies and empty promises of change, and his assurances that nothing meant anything. In a moment of sheer rage, Helen grabbed a firearm from the cabinet. She aimed it at Thomas, who stood there, shocked and unable to react. The shot rang out, loud, final, and unforgiving. Thomas fell to the floor, his body still in disbelief, even as it fell to the ground. His life ended in that instant. Helen stood over him, the weapon in her hand, her heart pounding, shocked by her actions. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Helen standing motionless beside the lifeless body of her husband. There was no sign of a struggle, no attempt to defend herself or flee. Just the cold, unnerving stillness of a woman who had taken justice into her own hands. The house was eerily quiet, the air thick with the weight of the crime. Helen made the call herself, reporting the murder with an unsettling calmness that immediately raised suspicion among the investigators. Her voice was steady, almost devoid of emotion, as she explained that she had shot Thomas in a fit of rage. But the lack of panic and the way she recounted the events with clinical precision baffled those who arrived on the scene. There was no frantic apology or tearful explanation, just an odd sense of finality. At first, the police considered the possibility of a crime of passion, an explosive outburst fueled by a sudden, overwhelming betrayal. But as they dug deeper into the investigation, a far more disturbing picture began to emerge. Evidence pointed to a carefully planned and premeditated crime. It was soon discovered that Helen had been tracking her husband's movements for weeks, if not longer. She had installed tracking software on his phone and kept detailed records of his interactions with Sarah. She had observed their secret meetings, noting the time and location of each encounter, and had even gone so far as to monitor his social media activity to confirm her suspicions. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of a woman obsessed with her husband's infidelity, one who had been stewing in her anger and resentment for months. In addition to the physical evidence, police uncovered Helen's journals. In them, she had written about her growing sense of betrayal and humiliation. The journals were filled with graphic descriptions of her emotional state, her thoughts ranging from despair to violent fantasies of revenge. Helen had confided in a close friend, telling her in no uncertain terms that she was planning to confront Thomas and make him pay for his betrayal. The friend had advised her to talk things through with her husband, but Helen's mind was made up. She had meticulously mapped out her plan, choosing the perfect time and place for the confrontation. An evening when Thomas would be alone, and when she knew he would not expect her wrath. She even purchased the gun weeks in advance, hiding it in the drawer of her dresser, waiting for the right moment to strike. Helen, the seemingly perfect wife and mother, had turned into a killer, a woman driven to murder by the toxic combination of betrayal, jealousy, and heartbreak. Some saw her as a victim of an unfaithful husband who had shattered her world, while others viewed her as a cold-blooded murderer who had taken matters into her own hands without any regard for the consequences. The media coverage was relentless, with every detail of Helen's personal life, including the history of her marriage and the affair, being exposed for all to see. Public opinion was divided. Some sympathized with her, believing that the pain of being betrayed by the man she loved was enough to drive anyone to the edge. Others saw her as manipulative and calculating, a woman who had coldly executed her plan to take control of her fractured life, regardless of the human cost. As the trial approached, the nation's attention only grew more intense. Helen, once seen as a devoted wife and mother, now stood as a symbol of the dangers of unchecked emotional turmoil. Her actions were both tragic and terrifying, a reminder of how a single, unforgivable betrayal could unravel everything: a person's sanity, their marriage, and their moral compass. Would she be seen as a victim of circumstance, or as a woman who allowed her emotions to spiral into something monstrous? The world watched, awaiting the answer. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted to Sarah, the woman who had been the catalyst for the tragic chain of events. She was brought in for questioning, her emotions a mix of confusion and fear as she tried to make sense of the situation. The police, after thorough interrogation, ruled her out as a suspect in the murder. To Sarah, the affair had been a fleeting connection, one that she believed was hidden in the shadows of Thomas's marriage. She had never expected that it would come to this. Her life, too, was suddenly turned upside down. She had been blind to the depth of the resentment brewing within Helen, and the idea that it could end in such a violent, irreversible way left her stunned and shaken. As detectives pieced together the timeline of events, it became clear that the affair was merely the spark that ignited an underlying and simmering resentment that Helen had been harboring for years. Beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage, there had been tension and unmet emotional needs. Thomas had become distant over time, and though Helen tried to ignore it, she couldn't help but notice the signs of his growing detachment. It was this slow unraveling of their relationship that had, in the end, led her to betray her moral compass. The affair had been the breaking point, but Helen's path to that point had been paved with years of dissatisfaction and emotional neglect. As the investigation drew to a close, Helen was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence against her, a part of the public could not help but feel sympathy for her. Some viewed her as a woman who had been pushed to the edge by a husband who had betrayed her trust and humiliated her in the worst possible way. They saw a woman who had been broken by the betrayal, a victim of a society that often ignored the emotional labor of women in marriages. But others saw her actions as cold, calculated, and inexcusable. To them, Helen was no different than any other murderer who had taken a life in a moment of calculated rage. The complexity of her emotions, grief, anger, and betrayal, did little to soften the harsh reality of her crime. The trial became a dramatic spectacle, drawing crowds and media attention from around the country. The prosecution's case centered around Helen's emotional state, arguing that her actions had been premeditated, driven by the slow burn of betrayal, rather than a sudden burst of passion. She was painted as a woman who had allowed her jealousy and rage to consume her, methodically planning and executing her husband's murder. The defense, however, argued that Helen had been emotionally unstable, that her mind had been clouded by the years of emotional neglect and the devastating discovery of her husband's affair. They suggested that, while her actions were tragic, they were the result of a mind pushed too far. As the jury deliberated, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The case had stirred emotions on both sides, with Helen's fate hanging in the balance. Days passed before the jury returned with their verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in whispers, some in disbelief, others with a sense of grim justice. The jury had decided that Helen's actions, while deliberate, had not been premeditated to the degree that warranted the death penalty or a charge of first-degree murder. On the other hand, Helen's defense team painted a different picture. They argued that she had been pushed to the edge by the crushing weight of her husband's betrayal. Her lawyer contended that the affair had shattered her sense of self-worth and destroyed the trust she once had in Thomas. Overcome by grief and emotional turmoil, Helen had snapped in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Her defense team presented evidence of her deteriorating mental health, sleepless nights, escalating depression, and feelings of utter hopelessness as she grappled with the discovery of the affair. They painted Helen as a woman who had been systematically destroyed by the man she had once loved and trusted, a woman who had finally lost her grip on reality. Despite the defense's emotional argument, the evidence of premeditation remained overwhelming. The prosecution seized upon Helen's journals, where she had written extensively about her growing anger, sense of betrayal, and the gradual plan she had developed to confront Thomas. They also pointed to the murder weapon, which had been purchased weeks in advance, reinforcing their case that Helen had not acted in a fit of passion, but had methodically planned the crime. Her actions, the prosecution argued, were not those of a woman driven to madness by emotional devastation, but of a calculated individual who had decided to take justice into her own hands. For weeks, the courtroom drama captivated the public's attention. Opinions were divided. Some viewed Helen as a victim of a cruel betrayal, a woman who had been broken by the very man she had trusted with her life. Others argued that she had let her emotions spiral out of control, becoming consumed by anger and jealousy. As the trial progressed, a new question began to emerge. Could the nature of Thomas's affair with Sarah have played a more significant role in Helen's actions? Some began to speculate that it wasn't just the affair itself, but the emotional abuse Helen had suffered over the years that had left her vulnerable to snapping. Was Thomas's infidelity the breaking point? Or had there been deeper, unresolved issues within the marriage that Helen had never been able to confront? After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. The court acknowledged the emotional toll of Helen's betrayal, but they also recognized the severity of her actions. While the jury accepted that Helen's emotional state played a significant role in the crime, they ultimately concluded that her actions were not impulsive or unprovoked. They sentenced her to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The verdict was met with mixed reactions from the public. Some felt that Helen had been a victim of circumstances, a woman pushed to her breaking point by a man who had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. Others believed that the justice system had been lenient, feeling that Helen's crime could not be excused, no matter the emotional turmoil she had endured. In the end, Helen's story remained a tragic, complicated tale of love, betrayal, and the dangerous consequences of letting resentment fester in the shadows of a marriage. Helen's time in prison was marked by deep self-reflection and regret over her actions. She often wondered if things could have been different had she confronted Thomas about the affair without resorting to violence. Though she recognized that nothing could bring him back and that her actions were unforgivable, she tried to reconcile with her children, who had been placed in the care of relatives after her arrest. Her son, now a teenager, resented her, and her young daughter struggled to understand the tragedy. Helen wrote letters to them, expressing her sorrow and explaining her pain, but the damage was done. In prison, Helen became more introspective, turning to art and writing to process her emotions. She also became involved in prison outreach, helping women with similar emotional struggles. Despite never fully forgiving herself, she tried to find meaning in her new life. Though eligible for parole after 15 years, Helen chose to serve her full sentence, feeling she didn't deserve freedom given the consequences of her actions and the deep pain her actions had caused her children and the people who once loved her. The weight of her choices continued to shape her existence, and she could not escape the reality of what she had done. She saw herself as a cautionary tale, a woman driven to extremes by betrayal and hurt, unable to reclaim the life she had lost. Meanwhile, the case of Thomas, Helen, and Sarah continued to haunt the public, raising unanswered questions. How could Helen, a seemingly composed woman, let her emotions lead to murder? Was the affair a symptom of deeper marital issues? And what role did Sarah play in the tragedy? The public debated these questions for years, wondering if there could have been another way to resolve the situation without violence, and whether Thomas would have left Helen for Sarah. Welcome to True Crime Case Files, the podcast where we delve into chilling stories of love, betrayal, and murder. Today, we travel to the quiet town of La Mesa, Texas, where a seemingly idyllic community was shaken to its core in early May of 2022. What began as whispers of an affair soon turned into a harrowing tale of deception and desperation, culminating in the brutal murder of a pregnant secretary. Marlene Hayes was a 31-year-old secretary at the La Mesa Sheriff's Office, known for her quick wit, organizational skills, and warm personality. Born and raised in La Mesa, Texas, Marlene graduated from La Mesa High School in 2009 and later earned a certificate in office administration from Midland College. She married her high school sweetheart, Travis Hayes, in 2017, and the two seemed like the perfect small-town couple. Marlene was active in her church and loved baking, often bringing homemade treats to the office. In early 2021, Marlene began working at the sheriff's office, where she met Sheriff Willie Carlin, a charismatic and respected leader in the community. Willie, 45, was known for his charm and ability to connect with people, qualities that had earned him multiple re-elections. Initially, their relationship was professional, with Willie mentoring Marlene in her new role. However, as they worked closely together, their conversations grew more personal. Marlene confided in Willie about her struggles in her marriage, how Travis had become distant and seemed uninterested in starting a family. Willie in turn shared his frustrations about his own strained relationships as a womanizer. By mid-2021, their connection deepened. After a late-night work session in the office, their relationship turned physical. Both felt a mix of excitement and guilt, but they rationalized the affair as an escape from their personal problems. They worked hard to keep their sexual relationship a secret, meeting for sex in out-of-town motels and using burner phones to communicate. Marlene even adjusted her work hours to avoid suspicion. In February 2022, Marlene discovered she was pregnant. The news left her both elated and terrified. She longed to be a mother, but she had no way of knowing if the father was Travis or Willie. The uncertainty weighed heavily on her. She initially tried to hide her pregnancy, wearing loose clothing and avoiding conversations about her future. When she finally told Willie, he reacted with panic, urging her to keep the baby's paternity a secret. In the weeks leading up to her death, Marlene's mood became erratic. Close friends noticed she alternated between bursts of excitement about the baby and moments of anxiety. She began dropping hints to Travis about wanting a fresh start, though she stopped short of revealing her affair. By early May, she had started researching DNA testing options online, including popular kits like 23andMe. As she grappled with her emotions, Marlene found herself caught in a web of secrets and fear, unsure of what the future held for her and her baby. On the morning of May 7, 2022, a Saturday, La Mesa was waking up to a clear Texas sky. Around 8:30 a.m., Deputy Kevin Morales, a 26-year-old officer with the Sheriff's Department, arrived at the office to prepare for his weekend shift. Morales had stopped by Stripes for a coffee and breakfast taco, a routine he rarely skipped. When he unlocked the building's front door, he noticed something odd. Marlene Hayes' car was still parked in its usual spot. Morales entered the office, calling out Marlene's name, but there was no response. As he walked toward her desk, he spotted her purse and phone lying untouched. Feeling uneasy, he opened the door to Sheriff Carlin's private office. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Marlene's body was slumped on the floor behind the sheriff's desk. Blood pooled around her head, and a gunshot wound was visible near her temple. The scene was eerily silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Morales froze for a moment, then backed out of the room and called 911, his voice shaking as he described the situation. "Dispatch, this is Deputy Morales. I need immediate backup at the sheriff's office. It's Marlene. She's been shocked," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Paramedics arrived quickly, followed by more deputies. When first responders checked Marlene's vitals, they discovered something remarkable. Despite her fatal injury, her baby had survived. They performed an emergency cesarean section on site, delivering a healthy baby boy. The infant was rushed to the hospital and placed in neonatal care, where doctors marveled at his survival. Deputies cordoned off the area, locking down the office and its surroundings. News of the tragedy spread quickly through La Mesa, a town of fewer than 10,000 residents where everyone seemed to know each other. By lunchtime, local outlets like the La Mesa Press Reporter were running headlines, and social media buzzed with rumors. The discovery shocked the community, leaving friends and family in disbelief. Marlene, who had been eagerly preparing for motherhood, was gone, and questions about her untimely death hung heavy over La Mesa that day. The scene inside Sheriff Willie Carlin's office on the morning of May 7, 2022 was one of both tragedy and unexpected hope. Marlene Hayes, 31, lay lifeless on the floor, a fatal gunshot wound to her temple. Despite the horror, first responders quickly realized her 9 months pregnant condition presented a chance to save her baby. Paramedics worked swiftly, performing an emergency cesarean section right there on the office floor. Against all odds, a healthy baby boy was delivered. His first cries filled the room, a small miracle amid the chaos. The infant was rushed to La Mesa Medical Center for care. The news of the miraculous delivery spread quickly, earning headlines in local outlets like the La Mesa Press Reporter and even a brief mention on Good Morning America. Meanwhile, police sealed off the office, treating the area as a potential homicide scene. Lead investigator Surgeon Michelle Ortega, 38, known for her meticulous nature, arrived within an hour to oversee the investigation. The small office was immediately combed for evidence. Blood spatter analysis suggested the shot was fired at close range, likely from a handgun. The sheriff's desk was in disarray, with papers scattered and a broken coffee mug on the floor. Ortega noted the lack of signs of forced entry, raising the possibility that Marlene's killer was someone she knew. As detectives worked, they retrieved Marlene's phone from her desk. An analysis of her recent messages revealed a shocking revelation. She had been having an affair with Sheriff Carlin. The sexually explicit texts detailed secret late-night meetings, throwing arguments about her pregnancy, and Carlin's repeated pleas for her to keep quiet about the affair. The discovery stunned the officers at the scene, many of whom had worked under Carlin for years. He had a reputation as a charismatic and competent leader, the kind of man people trusted to uphold the law. Yet these messages painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, desperate to protect his career and personal life. Sergeant Ortega instructed her team to dig deeper into Carlin's recent whereabouts and interactions with Marlene. They also flagged her husband, Travis Hayes, as a person of interest, noting his strained relationship with Marlene in recent months. The discovery of Marlene's affair not only complicated the investigation, but also began to fracture the small-town trust that had surrounded Sheriff Carlin. As forensic evidence and witness statements continued to be collected, the team faced a growing web of secrets and betrayal. Travis Hayes and Marlene were often called the perfect couple in La Mesa, Texas. High school sweethearts, they had been married for 5 years and seemed to have it all: a cozy home on Walnut Street, a close-knit group of friends, and shared Friday night dinners at Sonic Drive-In. Travis, 32, was a dedicated mechanic at Morrow's Auto Repair, known for his steady hands and quiet demeanor. Marlene balanced his reserved nature with her sharp wit and warm personality, making them a beloved pair in the small town. But beneath the surface, cracks had been forming in their relationship. Over the past year, friends noticed that Travis had grown distant, often staying late at work or skipping social gatherings altogether. While Marlene was open about wanting children, Travis seemed hesitant, brushing off conversations about starting a family. When Marlene announced her pregnancy, Travis' reaction was lukewarm at best. Instead of joy, he seemed tense, fueling speculation among close friends. After Marlene's murder, the police brought Travis in for questioning. Initially cooperative, he appeared devastated by the news of his wife's death. "I'd loved her," he told officers, his voice shaking. However, his demeanor shifted when detectives revealed evidence of Marlene's affair with Sheriff Carlin. Text messages and meeting logs from Marlene's phone showed she and Carlin had been seeing each other for months, often meeting late at night. Travis was stunned. "I had no idea," he said, his hands gripping the edge of the interrogation table. His face flushed with anger and hurt. He struggled to process the revelation. The betrayal cut deep, and his initial shock turned into resentment. Still, he vehemently denied any involvement in her murder. "I could never hurt her, no matter what she did," he insisted. Investigators pressed him on his whereabouts the night of May 6. Travis explained he'd been at home watching reruns of The Big Bang Theory on CBS, falling asleep on the couch before midnight. He offered to let police search his property, including his tools. A search of the shed revealed several items of interest, including a crowbar and a pair of gloves with traces of what appeared to be blood. Forensics later determined the blood wasn't Marlene's, but the discovery deepened police suspicions. While Travis's heartbreak seemed genuine, his connection to Marlene's strained marriage and the presence of suspicious items placed him squarely under scrutiny. Sheriff Willie Carlin, 45, was a respected figure in La Mesa, Texas, but his personal life was the subject of constant whispers. Known for his charisma and knack for resolving disputes, Willie was the type of leader who could charm anyone. Yet behind closed doors his reputation was much darker. Rumors swirled around town, but Willie had a pattern of pursuing married women, using his position of authority to lure them into affairs. Some stories even suggested he had paid at least 2 women to terminate pregnancies to keep his escapades secret. Marlene Hayes, it turned out, was just one of many women Sheriff Carlin had been involved with. When police brought Willie in for questioning, he initially downplayed their relationship, referring to it as a nothing fling. "Marlene and I was a nothing thing," he said with a shrug, trying to maintain his composure. "It was just quickies every now and then, she knew that." Willie explained that their affair began innocently enough, with late-night make-out sessions at the sheriff's office. Over time, those conversations had turned into secret rendezvous for sex at motels just outside of town, including the Budget Inn off Highway 87. He insisted that their relationship was consensual and purely physical, claiming Marlene Newtley had no intention of changing his life. However, detectives weren't convinced by Willie's casual attitude. They had already uncovered text messages between him and Marlene, showing she had pleaded with him to take responsibility for her pregnancy. In the days before her death, Marlene had sent him a final message: "We need to talk this bleep. I can't do this bleeping alone any bleeping longer." The turning point in the interrogation came when police confronted Willie with forensic evidence. A paternity test confirmed that Marlene's unborn child was his. As the news sank in, Willie's confident demeanor faltered. His face turned pale, and he leaned back in his chair, struggling to find the right words. "That can't be," he muttered, shaking his head. When pressed further, he admitted that Marlene had told him she wasn't sure if the baby was his or her husband's. "I didn't think the bleep was mine," he said defensively, his voice rising. Detectives continued to press him, questioning his motives and reminding him of the potential fallout. Willie had everything to lose: his career, his family, and his standing in the community. While he continued to deny any involvement in Marlene's murder, his flustered reactions and evasive answers only deepened investigators' suspicions. As the questioning dragged on, Willie's frustration grew. "I've done a lot of stupid bleep," he admitted, his tone bitter. "But I'm not a killer." Still, his history of infidelity and the confirmed paternity test placed him at the center of the investigation, and police weren't ready to rule him out. As investigators probed deeper into the lives of Marlene Hayes and Sheriff Willie Carlin, they stumbled upon a shocking twist: a third person linked to the case, someone who had secretly been in love with Willie for years. This individual's unrequited feelings and growing resentment toward Willie and Marlene would change the entire trajectory of the investigation. The breakthrough came when detectives combed through Willie's emails and social media accounts. Among the routine correspondence, they uncovered messages from a local woman, Brenda Foster, a 38-year-old dispatcher at the sheriff's office. Brenda's emails to Willie, which started innocuously enough, gradually revealed a pattern of deep affection, frustration, and eventually bitterness. One email from March 2022 stood out. Brenda had written, "I've always been there for you, Willie. I don't understand how you could do this to me, to us." Another message, sent just weeks before Marlene's death, read, "You'll regret hurting me, just like you'll regret choosing her." Police interviewed co-workers and friends of Brenda, who painted a picture of a woman deeply infatuated with Willie. She had worked closely with him for over a decade and was known to be fiercely loyal. According to one colleague, Brenda often spoke about her admiration for the sheriff, going so far as to hint she believed they had a future together. Brenda's jealousy reportedly reached new heights when she discovered Willie's affair with Marlene. Investigators pieced together that she likely found out through confidential department records, perhaps overhearing details about the affair or seeing messages on Willie's phone. Witnesses described Brenda becoming withdrawn and irritable during this time, snapping at coworkers and avoiding social events. The final piece of the puzzle came when detectives analyzed security footage from the Hayes family's neighborhood. A vehicle matching Brenda's car was spotted driving near the Hayes home late on the night of Marlene's death. A search warrant for Brenda's car revealed strands of hair and fibers matching items found at the crime scene. This discovery reframed the entire investigation. Detectives now believe Brenda's long-simmering resentment toward Willie, compounded by her discovery of his affair, may have motivated her to target Marlene. The evidence suggested Brenda viewed Marlene as a rival and blamed her for the wedge she imagined between herself and Willie. The twist opened up a new line of inquiry, forcing investigators to rethink their initial assumptions. Forensics teams began working overtime to connect Brenda to the crime definitively, as police prepared for what could be a dramatic turn in the case. As police dug deeper into Brenda Foster's past, they uncovered another shocking layer to her connection with Sheriff Willie Carlin. She was not just a secret admirer but one of the many married women Willie had seduced. Their affair began 5 years earlier, during late-night shifts at the sheriff's office. At the time, Brenda was married to Tom Foster, a truck driver, and they shared 2 young children. According to court records, Brenda's affair with Willie led to the unraveling of her marriage. When Tom discovered her infidelity, he filed for divorce in 2019. Brenda's behavior during the custody battle raised concerns. She struggled with bouts of anger, often lashing out in emails and text messages to her ex-husband. Ultimately, the court granted Tom full custody of their children, citing Brenda's unstable behavior. Friends and colleagues noticed a shift in Brenda after the divorce. She became more withdrawn and began fixating on Willie, who by then had moved on to other relationships. Despite her public attempts to seem indifferent, private emails and diary entries revealed she was still obsessed with him. Losing her family only deepened her emotional dependence on Willie, even as their relationship fizzled out. When police searched Brenda's home and electronics, they discovered disturbing evidence that connected her to Marlene Hayes. Text messages and social media posts showed that Brenda had made several veiled threats directed at Marlene after learning about her affair with Willie. In one particularly alarming post on a private Facebook group, Brenda wrote, "Some people don't deserve their happy endings. Some people don't deserve to bring children into this world." Witnesses also came forward to report Brenda's escalating hostility. A co-worker recalled hearing Brenda mutter, "That woman doesn't know what's coming to her," when Marlene's pregnancy became public knowledge. Another disturbing discovery was a voice memo Brenda had saved on her phone, in which she ranted about how Willie always ruins lives but never pays the price. Police theorized that Brenda's threats stemmed from a toxic mix of jealousy and rage. She saw Marlene as not only another woman who had taken Willie's attention, but also as someone about to give birth to the child she could never have with him. The evidence pointed to a chilling motive. Brenda's violent threats suggested she had been harboring dark intentions toward Marlene and her unborn baby. For investigators, these revelations solidified Brenda's role as a prime suspect in the unfolding tragedy. As the investigation deepened, police uncovered shocking evidence pointing directly to Sheriff Willie Carlin as Marlene Hayes' killer. The motive? Desperation. Willie was facing re-election in just a few months, and news of his affair with Marlene, and the possibility that her unborn child was his, threatened not only his career but his carefully crafted reputation. Known for his charm and good old boy persona, Willie had managed to sidestep rumors of past indiscretions, but this scandal could not be contained. The breaking point came on a quiet night in May of 2022. According to witnesses and office security footage, Willie and Marlene had a heated argument in his office. Marlene, visibly emotional, demanded that Willie acknowledge their affair and hinted that she was prepared to come clean if he didn't step up. Investigators later theorized that this ultimatum sent Willie into a panic, faced with the possibility of losing everything: his position, his reputation, and his freedom. Willie's decision took a deadly turn. In a fit of rage and fear, Willie grabbed his service weapon and shot Marlene at close range. The fatal encounter left him staring at an unplanned murder, and he immediately set about covering his tracks. To divert suspicion, Willie concocted a plan to frame Marlene's husband, Travis. Under the cover of night, he planted incriminating evidence in Travis' torch, including a pair of gloves stained with Marlene's blood and a wrench he claimed was the murder weapon. At first, his plan seemed foolproof. With his position as sheriff, Willie controlled key aspects of the investigation, ensuring that the planted evidence would come to light. But cracks began to appear in his story. Forensic experts determined that Marlene's wounds were caused by a gun, not a wrench. Surveillance footage showed Willie acting suspiciously near the tool on the night of the murder. His colleagues also noted his erratic behavior during the investigation, including his obsessive interest in pinning the crime on Travis. The final piece of evidence came from ballistics testing, which matched the bullet found in Marlene's body to Willie's service weapon. With this undeniable proof, police arrested Willie at his home. Neighbors reported seeing him led away in handcuffs, visibly pale and trembling. For Willie, the arrest marked the end of his double life. Once a pillar of the La Mesa community, he now faced charges of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. The reality of his downfall, paired with the public humiliation, left him a broken man. By March of 2023, the trial of Sheriff Willie Carlin became the most talked-about event in La Mesa, Texas. Once hailed as a beloved leader and protector of the community, Willie now faced charges of first-degree murder for killing Marlene Hayes, a pregnant woman whose unborn child was likely his. The courtroom was packed with reporters, townsfolk, and those curious about how the mighty had fallen. Willie's defense team, led by high-profile attorney Charles "Chuck" Beasley, leaned heavily on the sheriff's once spotless reputation. They painted him as a dedicated public servant and family man who had been unfairly targeted. Beasley argued that the accusations didn't align with Willie's character, stating, "A man so respected, so cherished by his community, would never commit such a heinous act." Beasley also attempted to raise doubts about the forensic evidence, claiming it was circumstantial and misinterpreted. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Carmen Ortiz, presented a different narrative. They outlined Willie's years of manipulation, his pattern of using his position to hide his indiscretions, and the overwhelming evidence tying him to the murder. Ortiz pointed to the ballistics match, surveillance footage, and planted evidence in Travis Hayes' tool as proof of Willie's guilt. In her closing statement, Ortiz declared, "This is not a case of a beloved public servant wrongfully accused. This is a case of a man who thought he was untouchable, using his power to destroy lives and cover his crimes." Willie took the stand in his defense, maintaining his innocence. He insisted he had nothing to do with Marlene's murder and claimed he was being framed by unknown enemies. At times he became emotional, appealing directly to the jury and the people of La Mesa. But under cross-examination, his confidence faltered as Ortiz highlighted inconsistencies in his testimony. After deliberating for 3 days, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts. On March 29, 2023, Willie was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, Willie stared blankly ahead, the weight of the decision finally sinking in. Outside the courthouse, the community was divided. Some mourned the loss of the sheriff they once admired, while others felt justice had been served for Marlene and her unborn child. The trial ended a dark chapter in La Mesa's history, but the scars it left behind would remain for years. The guilty verdict against Sheriff Willie Carlin sent shockwaves through La Mesa. Once a pillar of the community, Willie began serving a life sentence without parole at the maximum security Allen B. Polunsky unit in Texas. Despite his incarceration, his story didn't end with the sentencing. Surprisingly, Brenda Foster emerged as a central figure in the aftermath. Following a bitter custody battle with Travis Hayes, she won custody of Marlene's baby boy. Brenda named the child Willie Jr., a controversial choice given the circumstances. Many in the community were stunned, but Brenda insisted the name honored her wishes. She raised Willie Jr. as her own, determined to give him a stable and loving home. Travis, who had been cleared of any involvement in Marlene's murder, faced his own struggles. The loss of his wife and child left him emotionally shattered. Friends described him as a shadow of his former self, and he eventually moved out of La Mesa to start anew. Travis remained largely out of the public eye, but court records show he made attempts to reconnect with his son through visitation, though these efforts were reportedly met with resistance from Brenda. In a shocking twist, Brenda married Willie in a prison ceremony later that year. The decision sparked outrage and disbelief among locals. Some saw it as a betrayal of Marlene's memory, while others speculated that Brenda's grief and complicated emotions might have led her to such an extreme choice. Willie and Brenda maintained their relationship through letters, phone calls, and occasional supervised visits. The story of Marlene Hayes, her tragic death, and the scandal surrounding Sheriff Carlin became a cautionary tale for the town of La Mesa. While life moved on, the events left an indelible mark on the community, serving as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. This has been True Crime Case Files. Thank you for listening. Stay vigilant, and remember, the truth always finds a way.